Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of justice. Sometimes the person you wrong turns out to be exactly the person who will teach you the hardest lesson of your life. This is the story of Marcus Chen, a cocky military recruit who thought his strength gave him the right to intimidate others. He had no idea that his moment of cruelty would come back to haunt him in the most unexpected way possible. What happens when a bully discovers that his victim holds the power to make or break his entire future? What happens when someone who thought they were untouchable suddenly finds themselves at the mercy of the very person they hurt? This is that story, a tale of consequences, redemption, and the strange way life has of evening the score. Marcus thought he was invincible. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. The rain hammered against the windows of the university gym as Marcus Chen finished his last set of bench presses. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the leather bench below, and his muscles burned with the satisfying ache that came after a brutal workout. At 6'2" and 220 pounds of solid muscle, Marcus was the kind of guy who commanded attention wherever he went. His broad shoulders and confident swagger had earned him respect on the football team and admiration from his classmates. Marcus had always been the biggest guy in the room. Growing up in a military family, he had learned early that strength meant power, and power meant getting what you wanted. His father, Colonel James Chen, had drilled into him the importance of being tough, of never showing weakness, of always being the alpha. These lessons had served Marcus well throughout high school and into his first year at the state university. As he wiped down the equipment, Marcus noticed the gym was nearly empty except for a few dedicated athletes finishing their evening routines. The basketball team had left an hour ago, and most of the casual gym-goers had headed home for dinner. The quiet atmosphere was broken only by the rhythmic sound of someone hitting a heavy bag in the corner of the room. Marcus glanced over and saw a young woman working the punching bag with precision and intensity. She was small, probably around 5'4", with dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Her movements were fluid and controlled, each punch delivered with perfect form. Despite her size, the power behind her strikes was impressive. The bag shook violently with each impact, the chains creaking under the force. Something about her focused intensity annoyed Marcus. He had been having a bad day already. His girlfriend had broken up with him that morning, citing his aggressive tendencies and inability to treat people with respect. The words had stung more than he cared to admit, but rather than reflecting on them, he had chosen to dismiss them as the complaints of someone who just couldn't handle dating a real man. As Marcus packed his gym bag, he overheard the young woman on the phone with someone discussing her plans to join the military after graduation. She spoke with enthusiasm about her desire to serve her country and make a difference in the world. Her passion was evident in every word, and it reminded Marcus of his own military aspirations. Marcus had been accepted into the Navy's officer candidate program and was set to begin training in 6 months. The thought of military service excited him, but it also made him feel entitled to a certain level of respect. In his mind, his future service gave him authority over civilians, especially someone as small and seemingly insignificant as the woman across the gym. The combination of his bad mood, his sense of entitlement, and his natural tendency toward aggression created a perfect storm. As the woman finished her workout and headed toward the locker rooms, Marcus made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He intercepted her path, blocking her way with his imposing frame. "Hey there, little girl," he said with a condescending smile. "You know, you might want to try the cardio machines instead. This is where the real athletes train." The woman stopped and looked up at him with calm, dark eyes. "Excuse me?" she said quietly, her voice steady despite the obvious size difference between them. Marcus stepped closer, using his height advantage to intimidate her. "I said this area is for serious athletes. Maybe you should stick to yoga or something more suited to your abilities."
His voice carried the tone of someone who is used to being obeyed without question.
"I think there's been a misunderstanding," the woman replied, maintaining her composure. "I have just as much right to use this equipment as anyone else. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get going." She tried to step around him, but Marcus moved to block her path again. The action was deliberate and threatening, designed to assert his dominance and put her in her place. In that moment, something dark took over his judgment. "Listen here, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "When someone like me is talking to someone like you, you show respect. You don't just walk away." Before she could respond, Marcus reached out and grabbed her arm roughly, his large hand wrapping around her bicep with unnecessary force. The grip was hard enough to leave marks, hard enough to cause pain, and absolutely hard enough to send a clear message about who was in control. The woman's eyes flashed with something Marcus couldn't quite identify, but she didn't cry out or show fear. as he had expected. Instead, she looked down at his hand on her arm, and then back up at his face with an expression that seemed almost disappointed. "Let go of me," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that didn't match her small stature. For a moment, Marcus felt a flicker of uncertainty. There was something in her tone, something in the way she held herself, that suggested he had made a serious mistake. But his pride wouldn't let him back down now. He had committed to this course of action, and in his mind, backing down would be a sign of weakness. "What?" he challenged, tightening his grip slightly. "What are you going to do about it?" The woman stood perfectly still for several seconds, and Marcus could see her considering her options. The gym was nearly empty, and the few people remaining were too far away to help quickly if things escalated. She was alone with someone much larger and stronger than herself, someone who had just demonstrated his willingness to use physical intimidation. Finally, she spoke again, her voice even quieter than before. "My name is Elena Rodriguez," she said, as if the information was somehow important. "I want you to remember that name." The statement was strange enough to catch Marcus off guard. Why would she want him to remember her name? Was she planning to report him? The thought should have worried him, but his arrogance convinced him that nothing serious would come of it. After all, it was her word against his, and he was the one with connections and a bright future ahead of him. "Elena Rodriguez," he repeated mockingly. "Got it. Now run along before I decide you need to learn better manners." He released her arm with a shove that sent her stumbling backward a few steps. Elena caught herself quickly, her balance and coordination obvious even in that brief moment. She rubbed her arm where his fingers had dug in, and Marcus could see the red marks already forming on her skin. Without another word, Elena picked up her gym bag and walked away, her head held high despite what had just happened. She didn't run, didn't cry, and didn't threaten him with consequences. She simply left, leaving Marcus standing alone in the gym with a strange feeling in the pit of his stomach. As he watched her disappear through the exit, Marcus tried to convince himself that he had done nothing wrong. She had been disrespectful and he had put her in her place. That was how the world worked. The strong dominated the weak, and she needed to learn her position in the hierarchy. But even as he told himself these things, Marcus couldn't shake the image of Elena's face when she had told him her name. There had been something in her expression, something that suggested she knew something he didn't. It was the look of someone who had just filed away important information for future use. Marcus finished packing his bag and headed home to his apartment, trying to push the encounter out of his mind. He had more important things to think about than some random girl at the gym. His military career was about to begin, and he needed to focus on preparing himself for the challenges ahead. Over the next few days, Marcus threw himself into his training routine with renewed intensity. He ran longer distances, lifted heavier weights, and pushed his body to its limits. The encounter with Elena faded into the background of his consciousness, becoming just another minor incident in his life of asserting dominance over those he perceived as weaker. His friends noticed his increased aggression during their pickup basketball games, but they attributed it to pre-deployment nerves. Marcus had always been competitive, and they assumed his intensified training was just his way of preparing for military life. None of them knew about the incident at the gym, and Marcus had no intention of telling them. 3 weeks after the encounter, Marcus received his official orders to report to Naval Station Great Lakes for Officer Candidate School. The letter filled him with pride and excitement, confirming everything he believed about himself and his future. He was destined for greatness, destined to be a leader of men, destined to command respect wherever he went. As he read through the detailed instructions for his reporting date, Marcus felt a surge of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Soon, he would be wearing the uniform of a naval officer, with the authority and prestige that came with the rank. People would have to respect him then, whether they wanted to or not. The night before his departure, Marcus went out with his friends for a farewell celebration. They hit several bars near campus, toasting his future and reminiscing about their college years together. The alcohol flowed freely, and Marcus found himself boasting about his plans to make a name for himself in the military. "I'm going to show them what real leadership looks like," he declared, raising his beer in a mock salute. "These military instructors have no idea what they're dealing with." His friends laughed and clinked their glasses against his, caught up in his infectious confidence. None of them questioned his attitude or suggested that maybe he should approach his military training with a little more humility. They had all grown up in Marcus's shadow, accepting his dominance as natural and inevitable. As the night wore on and the alcohol took effect, Marcus found his thoughts drifting back to Elena Rodriguez. He wondered briefly what had become of her. whether she had gone through with her plans to join the military. The thought amused him. Someone so small and weak, trying to succeed in an environment designed for warriors like himself. Little did Marcus know that at that very moment, Elena was completing her final preparations for her new assignment. She had just been promoted to lead physical training instructor at the Navy SEALs training facility in Coronado, California. Her reputation for excellence had preceded her, and the SEALs Command had specifically requested her services for their most challenging programs. Elena had spent the past 5 years proving herself in the most demanding military environments. She had completed Ranger School, earned her Special Forces qualification, and had consistently scored at the top of every physical fitness assessment she had ever taken. Her small stature had initially worked against her, but her incredible determination and natural athletic ability had eventually won over even her harshest critics. The incident with Marcus at the gym had not been forgotten. Elena had reported it to the appropriate authorities, and a note had been placed in Marcus's file. However, with no witnesses and no physical evidence beyond the temporary marks on her arm, no formal action had been taken. Elena had accepted this outcome with typical grace, knowing that sometimes justice came in unexpected ways. As Marcus stumbled home from his farewell party, drunk on alcohol and his own self-importance, he had no idea that his path was about to intersect with Elena's once again. He couldn't have imagined that the small woman he had intimidated and assaulted would soon hold his military future in her capable hands. The universe, it seemed, was preparing to teach Marcus Chen a lesson he would never forget. And Elena Rodriguez, the woman whose name he had so mockingly repeated, was going to be his teacher. Marcus arrived at Naval Station Great Lakes on a crisp Monday morning in September, his chest puffed with pride and his mind filled with visions of military glory. The sprawling training facility impressed him with its orderly rows of buildings, perfectly maintained grounds, and the constant presence of uniformed personnel moving with purpose and precision. As he checked in at the reception center, Marcus felt a thrill of excitement coursing through his veins. This was where his real life would begin, where he would transform from a college student into a leader of warriors. He had spent the entire flight from his hometown imagining himself barking orders at subordinates and earning the respect of his fellow officers. The first few weeks of officer candidate school proved more challenging than Marcus had anticipated, but not in ways that concerned him greatly. The academic coursework was demanding, covering everything from naval history and traditions to complex tactical scenarios and leadership principles. The physical training was intense, with daily runs, obstacle courses, and strength training sessions designed to push candidates to their limits. Despite the rigorous schedule, Marcus felt confident in his abilities. His natural athleticism served him well in the physical challenges, and his competitive nature drove him to excel in most areas of training. He quickly established himself as one of the stronger candidates in his class, earning the grudging respect of his instructors and the admiration of some of his fellow trainees. However, Marcus's attitude towards his peers and subordinates remained problematic. He had a tendency to belittle those he perceived as weaker, particularly the female candidates in his class. His comments were often subtle enough to avoid official reprimand, but they created a pattern of behavior that his instructors noted with growing concern. During a particularly challenging navigation exercise, Marcus publicly criticized a female candidate who had become disoriented in the dense woodland surrounding the training area. "Maybe if you spent less time worrying about breaking your nails and more time studying the compass, you wouldn't be lost," he had said loud enough for the entire squad to hear. The comment earned him a sharp rebuke from the exercise instructor, but Marcus brushed it off as oversensitivity on the part of the military establishment. In his mind, he was simply pointing out a weakness that needed to be addressed. Real warriors, he believed, didn't have time to coddle those who couldn't keep up. 3 months into his training, Marcus received news that would change the trajectory of his military career. Due to his excellent performance in the physical fitness assessments and his stated interest in special operations, he had been selected for an advanced training program that would prepare him for potential assignment to elite units within the Navy. The announcement filled Marcus with almost overwhelming pride. This was exactly what he had been hoping for: recognition of his superior abilities and an opportunity to prove himself among the best of the best. His fellow candidates congratulated him with a mixture of genuine respect and barely concealed envy, which only served to inflate his already considerable ego. The orders came with a catch, however. The advanced training would take place at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in California, home to the legendary Navy SEALs training programs. While Marcus would not be attending the actual SEAL training course, he would be participating in a specialized program designed to prepare officers for leadership roles in special operations units. Marcus spent his last week at Great Lakes basking in the glory of his selection and bragging to anyone who would listen about his upcoming assignment. He spoke confidently about his plans to eventually earn his trident and become a SEAL officer, despite the fact that such a path would require years of additional training and screening. "Coronado won't know what hit them," he boasted to his roommate on their final night at Great Lakes. "I'm going to show those instructors what real military bearing looks like." His roommate, a quieter candidate named David Kim, looked up from the book he was reading and shook his head slightly. "Maybe you should approach it with a little more humility," David suggested. "I've heard the instructors out there are pretty intense, and they don't appreciate arrogance." Marcus laughed dismissively. "Humility is for people who aren't confident in their abilities," he replied. "I know what I'm capable of, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make other people feel better about themselves." David shrugged and returned to his book, having learned over the past 3 months that arguing with Marcus was generally a waste of time. He had watched his roommates' interactions with their classmates and instructors, and he had a feeling that Marcus's attitude was going to catch up with him eventually. The flight to San Diego gave Marcus time to reflect on his journey so far and to plan his strategy for the challenges ahead. He spent most of the flight studying the materials he had been given about the Coronado training facility, memorizing the names of key personnel and familiarizing himself with the layout of the base. One name in particular caught his attention as he read through the instructor roster. Lieutenant Commander Elena Rodriguez, listed as the Senior Physical Training Instructor for Special Operations Preparation courses. The name seemed familiar, but Marcus couldn't quite place where he had heard it before. He made a mental note to look up her background, when he had access to the base computer systems. Marcus arrived in Coronado on a sunny Thursday afternoon, immediately struck by the contrast between the California base and the austere facilities at Great Lakes. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly to the west, and the warm breeze carried the scent of salt water and possibility. Palm trees lined the roadways, and the overall atmosphere seemed more relaxed than what he had grown accustomed to during his time in the Midwest. After checking into his assigned quarters, Marcus spent the evening exploring the base and getting his bearings. He was particularly interested in seeing the famous training areas where Navy SEALs forged their legendary reputation for excellence. The obstacle courses, swimming pools, and specialized equipment were impressive, and Marcus found himself imagining the day when he would earn the right to train alongside the elite warriors who called this place home. His first day of actual training began at 0500 hours with a formation in front of the main gymnasium. Marcus joined the 23 other candidates who had been selected for the advanced program, most of them coming from various Navy training facilities around the country. As they stood at attention in the pre-dawn darkness, Marcus felt a familiar surge of competitive energy flowing through his body. The candidates were addressed by Captain Morrison, the commanding officer of the Special Operations Training Division. Morrison was a decorated SEAL with over 20 years of experience, and his presence commanded immediate respect from everyone in formation. "Gentlemen and ladies," Morrison began, his voice carrying easily across the silent courtyard. "You have been selected for this program because you have demonstrated exceptional potential for leadership in special operations environments. However, I want to make one thing perfectly clear from the beginning. Potential means nothing if it is not backed up by character, integrity, and respect for your fellow warriors." Morrison paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Over the next 6 months, you will be tested in ways that go far beyond physical fitness and tactical knowledge. You will be evaluated on your ability to lead under pressure, to make difficult decisions in ambiguous situations, and to treat every member of your team with the respect they deserve regardless of their rank, gender, or background." The captain's eyes swept across the formation, seeming to make contact with each candidate individually. When his gaze fell on Marcus, there was something in his expression that suggested he had already formed an opinion about the young officer candidate. "Some of you will discover that you are not suited for this type of work," Morrison continued. "There is no shame in that recognition, and we will help you find a path that better matches your abilities and temperament. However, those who remain must understand that we expect nothing less than excellence in every aspect of your performance." After Morrison's remarks, the candidates were turned over to the physical training staff for their first workout evaluation. As they jogged toward the gym, Marcus found himself wondering about the identity of the senior PT instructor he had read about in his preparation materials. He was curious to see what kind of person had earned such a prestigious position in the most elite training environment in the military. The gymnasium was a cathedral of functional fitness equipment, with every piece of apparatus designed to test specific aspects of physical performance. Pull-up bars, rope climbing stations, kettlebells, and various specialized machines filled the space, while motivational posters featuring famous SEALs and other special operations warriors lined the walls. As the candidates assembled in formation inside the gym, a door at the far end of the building opened and several instructors entered. Marcus immediately focused on the lead figure, a compact woman with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and the kind of confident posture that spoke of years of military training. Even from a distance, something about her seemed familiar. As she approached the formation, Marcus felt a growing sense of unease that he couldn't quite explain. There was something about her movements, something about the way she carried herself, that triggered a memory he couldn't quite access. When she was close enough for him to see her face clearly, Marcus felt the blood drain from his cheeks and his stomach drop as if he had just stepped off a cliff. Standing before him, wearing the uniform of a lieutenant commander, and carrying herself with the unmistakable authority of someone who had earned her position through years of exceptional performance, was Elena Rodriguez. The woman he had grabbed and intimidated in a college gym 6 months ago was now his senior instructor, the person who would be evaluating his fitness for special operations training. The person whose name he had mockingly repeated was now in a position to determine whether his military career would continue or come to an abrupt and humiliating end. Elena's dark eyes swept across the formation with professional detachment, showing no sign of recognition when they briefly met his gaze. Her expression was calm and controlled, the face of someone who had complete confidence in her authority and abilities. She looked exactly like what she was, a warrior who had earned her place among the elite through dedication, skill, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. "Good morning, candidates," Elena said, her voice carrying easily through the large gym. "I am Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, and I will be your primary physical training instructor for the duration of this program. Over the next 6 months, I will be evaluating your fitness for potential assignment to special operations units within the Navy." Marcus tried to force his breathing to remain steady as Elena continued her introduction. His mind was racing, trying to process the implications of this unexpected reunion. Did she remember him? Was she planning some kind of revenge? How could he have been so unlucky as to end up under the command of the one person in the entire military who had a legitimate reason to dislike him? "Physical fitness is just one component of what we will be measuring," Elena continued. "We will also be evaluating your mental toughness, your ability to work as part of a team, and your character under pressure. Some of you may be surprised to learn that the most important quality we look for in special operations personnel is not strength or speed, but integrity." The word integrity seemed to hang in the air longer than the others, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Elena had looked directly at him when she said it. His palms were starting to sweat, and he found it difficult to maintain the rigid attention posture required during formal addresses. "Before we begin your first assessment, I want each of you to understand something very clearly," Elena said, her tone becoming more serious. "This program is designed to identify individuals who possess the character necessary to lead others in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. If you are the kind of person who believes that might makes right, or that your size or strength gives you the authority to intimidate others, you will not succeed here." Marcus felt as if she was speaking directly to him, outlining exactly the kind of behavior he had exhibited during their encounter at the gym. The coincidence was too specific to be accidental, and he began to suspect that Elena not only remembered him but had been specifically assigned to his training program for reasons beyond simple scheduling. "We will begin with a basic fitness assessment to establish baseline measurements for each candidate," Elena announced. "You will rotate through 8 stations, spending 10 minutes at each one. The instructors will be evaluating not only your performance but also your attitude, your interaction with fellow candidates, and your response to constructive criticism." As the candidates dispersed to their assigned starting stations, Marcus found himself paired with 3 other officers for the first rotation. His hands were shaking slightly as he prepared for what he knew would be the most scrutinized workout of his life. Elena moved through the gym like a force of nature, observing each candidate's performance and making notes on her clipboard. Her presence seemed to energize the other instructors, and Marcus could see that she commanded genuine respect from her colleagues. This was not someone who had achieved her position through politics or favoritism. She was clearly the real deal. When Elena reached Marcus's station, she watched his performance with the same professional detachment she had shown to every other candidate. She made notes, offered technical corrections when appropriate, and moved on to the next person without any indication that she knew who he was or what he had done to her. The lack of recognition was almost more unsettling than outright hostility would have been. Marcus found himself wondering if maybe Elena had simply forgotten about their encounter, or perhaps she had decided to put it behind her and focus on her professional responsibilities. The uncertainty was eating at him, making it difficult to concentrate on his performance. By the end of the assessment, Marcus was physically and emotionally exhausted. The combination of the intense workout and the psychological stress of wondering about Elena's intentions had left him drained in a way that no previous training had managed to achieve. As the candidates gathered their equipment and prepared to leave the gym, Elena addressed the group one final time. "Your performance today was adequate," she said, her tone suggesting that adequate was not a compliment. "However, I want you to understand that what we did today was simply a warm-up. The real testing begins tomorrow, and it will continue every day until you either prove yourselves worthy of advancement or demonstrate that you belong somewhere else." Her eyes found Marcus in the formation, and for just a moment he thought he saw the faintest hint of recognition in her expression. But before he could be certain, she had looked away and was dismissing the candidates for the day. As Marcus walked back to his quarters, his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and competing thoughts. The woman he had assaulted and humiliated was now in complete control of his military future, and he had no idea whether she intended to use that power for revenge or would maintain her professional objectivity. One thing was certain: his time in Coronado was going to be unlike anything he had ever experienced, and the arrogance that had carried him this far was about to be tested in ways he never could have imagined. The next few weeks at Coronado passed in a blur of intense physical training, challenging academic coursework, and increasing psychological pressure. Marcus found himself struggling to maintain the confident facade that had served him so well throughout his life. Every day brought new tests of his abilities, and Elena Rodriguez seemed to be watching his every move with an intensity that made him increasingly uncomfortable. Elena's training methods were unlike anything Marcus had experienced before. She had a way of pushing candidates to their absolute limits, while simultaneously teaching them to rely on their teammates for support and encouragement. Her workouts were scientifically designed to break down individual ego and build up collective strength, forcing even the most self-centered personalities to recognize their dependence on others. During a particularly brutal beach workout involving weighted carries and surf runs, Marcus found himself struggling to keep up with the pace Elena had set. The soft sand made every step a monumental effort, and the added weight of his pack seemed to increase with each passing minute. As he began to fall behind the main group, Marcus felt the familiar surge of anger that had always driven him to push through difficult situations. "Rodriguez!" he shouted above the sound of the crashing waves, using Elena's last name in a tone that carried more disrespect than military protocol typically allowed. "This pace is unrealistic for a training exercise. We're not trying to kill ourselves out here." The comment hung in the salt air for a moment, and Marcus immediately realized he had made a serious mistake. Elena stopped the entire formation with a sharp command and turned to face him with an expression that could have frozen the Pacific Ocean. "Candidate Chen," she said, her voice carrying a dangerous calm that was somehow more intimidating than shouting would have been. "Please step forward." Marcus felt every eye in the formation focused on him as he jogged to where Elena stood. The other candidates maintained their positions, but he could sense their mixture of sympathy and relief that they were not in his shoes. Elena's reputation as a demanding instructor was already well established among the group, and none of them wanted to be the focus of her attention when she was clearly displeased. "Did you just question the appropriateness of a training exercise designed by the senior physical training instructor for Navy Special Operations?" Elena asked, her dark eyes fixed unwaveringly on Marcus's face. Marcus felt his throat go dry as he realized the full implications of his outburst. Not only had he publicly challenged Elena's professional judgment, but he had done so in front of his fellow candidates and several other instructors who were observing the training. His anger had overridden his judgment once again, just as it had during their encounter at the college gym. "I was simply suggesting that maybe we could adjust the parameters to be more realistic," Marcus replied, trying to sound reasonable while fighting to control the tremor in his voice. Elena studied him for several long seconds, and Marcus got the distinct impression that she was seeing him clearly for the first time since his arrival at Coronado. There was something in her expression that suggested recognition was dawning, that the professional mask she had maintained was beginning to slip away. "Candidate Chen," Elena said slowly, "what makes you think you are qualified to evaluate the realism of training exercises designed by someone with 8 years of special operations experience and a doctorate in exercise physiology?" The question was delivered like a surgical strike, precise and devastating in its effectiveness. Marcus felt his carefully constructed self-image beginning to crumble under the weight of Elena's expertise and authority. Every assumption he had made about his own capabilities was being systematically dismantled in front of an audience of his peers. "I have been an athlete my entire life," Marcus replied weakly, grasping for any justification for his challenge to her authority. I know what the human body can and cannot handle. Elena nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his words with genuine interest. That's fascinating, she said. Tell me, Candidate Chen, what was your best marathon time in college? Marcus felt a flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. I never ran a marathon, he admitted. What about a half marathon? Elena continued. I focused more on strength training and football, Marcus replied, his voice growing smaller with each admission. I see, Elena said. And what was your undergraduate degree in?
Business administration,
Marcus mumbled, now understanding exactly where this line of questioning was leading. Elena smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression.
So you are telling me that as someone with a business degree and no endurance racing experience,
you feel qualified to critique training methods developed by someone with advanced degrees in both exercise science and military psychology, someone who has completed multiple marathons, Ironman competitions, and has been personally responsible for the physical preparation of some of the most elite warriors in the world. The silence that followed Elena's question was broken only by the sound of the waves and the labored breathing of the candidates who were still holding their positions. Marcus could feel the judgment of his peers, like a physical weight pressing down on his shoulders. Everything he had believed about himself was being systematically demolished by someone who had every reason to make his life difficult. Furthermore, Elena continued, her tone becoming more personal, you addressed me by my last name alone, without my rank or title. In your business administration classes, did they teach you anything about proper respect for authority, or was that considered optional coursework? Marcus felt his face burning with shame and anger in equal measure. He wanted to lash out, to defend himself, to somehow regain control of the situation, but he was beginning to understand that Elena held all the cards in this particular game, and his only choice was to play by her rules or face the consequences of continued defiance. No excuse, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, Marcus said through gritted teeth, forcing himself to use her proper title. Elena studied him for another moment, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something deeper in her expression. For just an instant, her professional mask slipped, and he saw a flash of the woman he had grabbed and intimidated in the college gym. The recognition was mutual now, and Marcus realized that his worst fears about this assignment were about to be confirmed.
Candidate Chen, Elena said quietly so that only he could hear her words. My office.
Tomorrow morning at 8860 hours. We need to have a conversation about respect, authority, and the consequences of poor judgment. The words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Elena's tone suggested that their upcoming meeting would be about much more than his performance during the beach workout. She had finally connected the dots about their previous encounter, and Marcus had no idea what she planned to do with that information. Formation! Recover! Elena commanded, and the other candidates gratefully relaxed from their rigid positions. We will continue this exercise tomorrow morning, beginning at 0500 hours. Candidate Chen, you will report to me 30 minutes prior to the formation time for additional instruction. As the group began their jog back to the main base, Marcus found himself running at the rear of the formation, isolated from his fellow candidates by his embarrassing confrontation with their instructor. The other officers maintained a respectful distance, unwilling to associate themselves with someone who had so spectacularly demonstrated poor judgment. That evening, Marcus sat in his quarters staring at the wall and trying to figure out how to handle his situation. The smart play would be to go to Elena's office the next morning, apologize for both his recent behavior and their previous encounter, and hope that she would be professional enough to separate her personal feelings from her evaluation of his military potential. But Marcus's pride made it difficult for him to contemplate such a course of action. Apologizing meant admitting that he had been wrong, that his behavior had been inappropriate, that he was not the superior person he had always believed himself to be. The thought of groveling to someone he had once dominated was almost more than his ego could bear. As he lay in his bunk that night, Marcus found himself thinking about Elena's qualifications and accomplishments. Her personnel file was available for review by candidates, and what he read there forced him to confront some uncomfortable truths about their relative positions in the military hierarchy. Elena Rodriguez had graduated at the top of her class from the United States Military Academy at West Point with degrees in engineering and psychology. She had completed Ranger School, earning her tab as one of only a handful of women to successfully finish the program at that time. She had served multiple combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, leading mixed-gender teams in some of the most dangerous regions of both countries. Upon her return from overseas, Elena had been selected for advanced education, earning her doctorate in exercise physiology from Stanford University, while simultaneously completing the Special Forces qualification course. Her research on optimizing human performance under extreme stress had been published in multiple peer-reviewed journals and had influenced training protocols throughout the special operations community. Most impressively, Elena had volunteered for and successfully completed the Navy SEAL physical screening test, becoming one of only 3 women ever to pass the initial requirements. While she had not continued through the full SEAL training program due to policy restrictions at the time, her performance had earned the respect of the SEAL community and had led to her current position as their primary physical training instructor. Reading through Elena's accomplishments, Marcus was forced to confront the reality that he was dealing with someone whose qualifications and achievements far exceeded his own. The woman he had dismissed as weak and insignificant had proven herself in ways that he could barely imagine, earning her position through merit, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. The contrast between Elena's resume and his own was stark and humbling. While she had been earning advanced degrees and leading soldiers in combat, Marcus had been playing college football and coasting through a business program that required minimal effort. While she had been pushing the boundaries of human performance and contributing to military science, Marcus had been focused on his personal gratification and social status. As 060 hours approached the next morning, Marcus found himself standing outside Elena's office with sweaty palms and a racing heart. The small building that housed the physical training administrative offices was quiet at this early hour, and Marcus could see light emanating from under Elena's door, along with the sound of typing on a computer keyboard. Taking a deep breath, Marcus knocked on the doorframe and waited for permission to enter. Elena's voice called out for him to come in, and Marcus stepped across the threshold into what felt like the most important meeting of his life. Elena's office was spartanly decorated, but filled with evidence of her accomplishments. Her various military awards and decorations were displayed on one wall, while the opposite wall featured photographs of her with various special operations units and training groups. Her desk was meticulously organized, with neat stacks of paperwork and a laptop computer showing what appeared to be training schedules and candidate evaluations. Elena herself was seated behind her desk in utilities, her dark hair pulled back in its customary bun, and her posture reflecting the confidence of someone completely comfortable with her authority. She gestured to the chair across from her desk and waited for Marcus to sit down before speaking. "Candidate Chen," Elena began, her voice carrying the formal tone of an official military conversation, "I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." Marcus felt his mouth go dry as Elena opened a file folder on her desk and removed several documents. Even from his position across the desk, he could see that one of the papers was a copy of the incident report from their encounter at the college gym. 6 months ago, Elena continued, "You physically assaulted me in a civilian gymnasium. You grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises, you used your size to intimidate me, and you made it clear that you believed your physical strength gave you the right to treat others with disrespect." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each one forcing him to confront the reality of his past behavior. There was no denying what he had done, no way to minimize or excuse his actions. Elena had documented everything, and the evidence of his misconduct was sitting on her desk in black and white. "At the time," Elena said, "I chose not to pursue formal charges against you, partly because I knew that the incident would likely be dismissed as a he said, she said situation. I also believed that life has a way of teaching people important lessons, and I was content to let the universe handle your education." Elena leaned back in her chair and studied Marcus with an expression that was impossible to read. "It seems the universe has a sense of humor," she continued. "Because here you are, 6 months later, sitting in my office and depending on my evaluation for the continuation of your military career." Marcus wanted to speak, to offer some explanation or apology that might improve his situation, but he found himself unable to form coherent words. The magnitude of his predicament was overwhelming, and he was beginning to understand that his military future might already be decided. "I want you to know," Elena said, "that I have not allowed our previous encounter to influence my evaluation of your performance during this program. My assessments have been based solely on your conduct and capabilities as demonstrated during training exercises." She opened Marcus's file and showed him several evaluation forms filled out in her precise handwriting. The ratings were all in the lower ranges of acceptable performance, but they appeared to be based on legitimate observations of his behavior and attitude rather than personal animosity. "However," Elena continued, "your conduct yesterday during the beach exercise, combined with your overall attitude toward your fellow candidates and your instructors, has confirmed what I suspected about your character when we first met. Elena stood up from her chair and walked around the desk to stand directly in front of Marcus. Even seated, he was nearly at her eye level, but somehow she seemed to tower over him with the force of her presence and authority. "You are a bully, candidate Chen," Elena said quietly. "You use your size and perceived strength to intimidate others, and you believe that might makes right. Those character traits make you fundamentally unsuitable for leadership in special operations, where success depends on trust, teamwork, and the ability to inspire others to achieve things they never thought possible." Marcus felt tears beginning to form in his eyes as the reality of his situation became clear. Everything he had worked for, everything he had believed about himself was crumbling under the weight of Elena's words. His military career was effectively over, ended by his own poor choices and character flaws. "I could recommend your immediate dismissal from this program," Elena said, returning to her seat behind the desk. "Your conduct has certainly warranted such action, and it would save the Navy the time and expense of continuing your training." She paused, letting the implications of her words sink in before continuing. "However, I believe in second chances, and I believe that people can change if they are truly motivated to do so."
Marcus looked up at Elena with a mixture of hope and confusion, unsure what she was offering, but grateful that his career might not be over after all.
"I am going to give you an opportunity to prove that you can be better than you have been," Elena said, "but understand that this opportunity comes with conditions, and failure to meet those conditions will result in your immediate removal from this program and a recommendation that you be reassigned to duties more suitable to your demonstrated character." Marcus nodded eagerly, willing to agree to almost anything that would allow him to continue his military career. "From this moment forward," Elena said, "you will treat every person on this base with the respect they deserve as fellow human beings and military personnel. You will address all instructors by their proper rank and title. You will support your fellow candidates rather than competing with them, and you will demonstrate through your actions that you understand the difference between leadership and bullying." Elena leaned forward in her chair, her dark eyes fixed intently on Marcus's face. "Most importantly," she said, "you will spend the next 6 months proving to me that you have the character necessary to lead others in life or death situations. Because that is exactly what special operations leadership requires. The ability to earn trust and inspire confidence in people who are depending on you to make decisions that could save or cost their lives." Marcus nodded again, beginning to understand the magnitude of what Elena was offering him. This was not just a chance to continue his military training, it was an opportunity to become a better person, to develop the character that had been lacking throughout his life. "Do we understand each other, Candidate Chen?" Elena asked. "Yes, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez," Marcus replied, his voice stronger and more sincere than it had been in their previous interactions. "Thank you for this opportunity." Elena studied him for a moment longer, then nodded and returned her attention to the paperwork on her desk. "Report to formation at 0500 hours, she said. "And Candidate Chen, I will be watching." As Marcus left Elena's office and walked across the base toward his quarters, he felt as if he was seeing his surroundings clearly for the first time since his arrival at Coronado. The reality of how close he had come to destroying his own future was sobering, and the realization that Elena had chosen to give him another chance despite their history was humbling in a way he had never experienced before. For the first time in his life, Marcus Chen was beginning to understand the difference between true strength and the hollow intimidation he had relied on for so long. The journey ahead would not be easy, but he was finally ready to begin the real work of becoming the person he needed to be. The weeks following Marcus's confrontation with Elena marked the beginning of the most challenging period of his life. Every morning brought new opportunities to prove that he could change, and every evening ended with him questioning whether he had the strength to continue the difficult work of rebuilding his character from the ground up. Elena's training program intensified significantly after their private meeting, but Marcus began to understand that the increased difficulty was not punishment, it was preparation. Every exercise was designed to break down the artificial barriers between candidates and force them to rely on each other for success. The lessons were as much about psychology and leadership as they were about physical fitness. During a particularly grueling underwater confidence training session, Marcus found himself paired with Jennifer Walsh, a petite naval aviator from Ohio who had struggled with some of the more physically demanding aspects of the program. In the past, Marcus would have seen her as a liability, someone whose weakness would drag down his own performance. But Elena's words about teamwork and mutual support echoed in his mind as he watched Jennifer prepare for the challenge ahead, The exercise required candidates to navigate an underwater obstacle course while wearing full gear and carrying additional equipment. The added weight and restricted visibility made the task extremely difficult, and several candidates had already failed to complete the course within the allotted time limit. As Jennifer entered the water, Marcus could see the fear in her eyes despite her determined expression. Swimming had never been her strongest skill, and the combination of cold water, heavy equipment, and time pressure was clearly overwhelming her confidence. Without thinking about his own performance evaluation, Marcus made a decision that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. Walsh, he called out quietly, using her last name with respect rather than condescension. Focus on your breathing and take your time with the first obstacle. I'll be right behind you if you need any help. Jennifer looked at him with surprise, clearly not expecting support from someone who had previously shown little interest in helping his fellow candidates. She nodded gratefully and began her descent, with Marcus following closely behind to provide assistance if needed. As they worked their way through the underwater maze, Marcus found himself thinking about Elena's definition of true strength. Supporting Jennifer's efforts didn't make him weaker, it made both of them more likely to succeed. When Jennifer became entangled in one of the rope obstacles, Marcus was able to help her free herself without either of them failing the exercise. Elena observed the entire interaction from the pool deck, making notes on her ever-present clipboard. When both candidates surfaced after completing the course, she approached Marcus with an expression that was difficult to read. "Candidate Chen," Elena said, her voice carrying a tone of professional interest. That was an interesting approach to the exercise. "Can you explain your decision-making process?" Marcus thought carefully about his answer, knowing that Elena was evaluating more than just his swimming ability. "Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, I realized that the mission was more important than individual performance. If candidate Walsh had failed the exercise, it would have reflected poorly on our entire team. By working together, we both succeeded." Elena nodded slowly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of what might have been approval in her expression. "That's correct," she said. "Special operations missions succeed or fail based on the performance of the team as a whole. Individual heroics usually result in mission failure and casualties." The comment represented a significant shift in how Elena interacted with Marcus during training sessions. While she maintained her professional distance and continued to challenge him relentlessly, there was a growing recognition that he was making genuine efforts to change his approach to leadership and teamwork. Marcus's relationship with his fellow candidates also began to evolve, as word spread about his willingness to help others succeed. David Kim, his former roommate from Great Lakes, was among the first to notice the change in Marcus's behavior. "You seem different," David observed one evening as they cleaned their equipment after a long day of training. "More focused on the mission and less worried about proving how tough you are." Marcus considered David's words carefully before responding. The old Marcus would have dismissed such observations as criticism and responded with hostility, but the conversations with Elena had forced him to examine his motivations more honestly than ever before. "I'm starting to understand that there's a difference between being strong and acting strong," Marcus replied. "Real strength comes from being able to admit when you're wrong and from helping others succeed, even when it doesn't directly benefit you." David smiled, recognizing the sincerity in his friend's words. "Elena Rodriguez is quite an instructor," he said. "I've never seen anyone push people to their limits while simultaneously teaching them to support each other. She's gotten through to candidates who seemed completely hopeless when they arrived." As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself studying Elena's leadership style with growing admiration and respect. She was demanding and uncompromising in her expectations, but she was also fair and consistent in her treatment of every candidate. She pushed people beyond what they thought they could achieve, while never asking them to do anything she couldn't do herself. During a night navigation exercise in the mountains outside San Diego, Marcus witnessed Elena in action, in ways that fundamentally changed his understanding of what military leadership actually looked like. The exercise was designed to test candidates' ability to work as teams in challenging conditions, with minimal supervision and support. Marcus's team had become lost in the darkness and difficult terrain, and their radio equipment had malfunctioned during a fall down a steep embankment. As the hours passed and their situation became more desperate, the team began to experience the kind of stress and fear that could lead to panic and poor decision-making. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, Elena appeared seemingly out of nowhere, moving through the darkness with the quiet confidence of someone completely at home in challenging environments. She assessed their situation quickly and began organizing their extraction, without making any of them feel incompetent or foolish for their predicament. "Navigation in mountainous terrain at night is one of the most difficult skills in special operations," she explained, as she helped them locate their position on the map. The fact that you maintained unit cohesion and didn't abandon your equipment shows good training and discipline. Now let's figure out how to get you back to base. Elena's approach to the crisis was instructive in ways that formal classroom lessons could never be. She took charge of the situation without undermining the authority of the team leader, provided guidance without making the candidates feel helpless, and turned what could have been a demoralizing failure into a valuable learning experience. As they made their way back to the base, Marcus found himself walking alongside Elena and taking advantage of the opportunity to ask her about her leadership philosophy. "Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez," he said carefully, "may I ask you a question about leadership techniques?" Elena glanced at him with what might have been surprise before nodding for him to continue. It was the first time Marcus had initiated a professional conversation with her since their confrontation in her office. "How do you know when to take charge of a situation and when to let others work through problems on their own?" Marcus asked. Elena considered the question as they continued walking through the darkness. "That's one of the most important questions any leader has to answer," she replied. "The key is understanding the difference between a learning opportunity and a genuine crisis. People grow stronger by working through challenges, but they can be damaged by being allowed to fail in situations that are beyond their current capabilities." She paused to help one of the other candidates navigate a particularly difficult section of trail before continuing. "In tonight's case, you and your team were in a situation where continued struggle could have resulted in injury or genuine danger. That made it appropriate for me to intervene. But if you had simply been frustrated or confused, I would have allowed you to work through the problem yourselves." Marcus absorbed Elena's words as they continued their trek back to base. Her explanation helped him understand why his own attempts at leadership had been so unsuccessful in the past. He had focused on demonstrating his superiority rather than helping others develop their capabilities. The conversation with Elena during the night exercise marked a turning point in their professional relationship. While she continued to maintain appropriate boundaries and evaluate his performance objectively, there was a growing recognition that Marcus was genuinely committed to changing his approach to leadership and personal conduct. This shift became more apparent during a particularly challenging team-building exercise that required candidates to work together to solve complex tactical problems under extreme time pressure. Marcus found himself serving as team leader for a mixed group that included several candidates who had previously struggled with various aspects of the training. Instead of trying to dominate the group through force of personality, Marcus focused on identifying each team member's strengths and finding ways to leverage those capabilities for the benefit of the mission. When one candidate suggested an approach that initially seemed inferior to his own ideas, Marcus took the time to listen and discovered that the alternative plan actually had significant advantages. Elena observed the entire exercise from a position where she could monitor multiple teams simultaneously. Marcus was aware of her presence but found that her scrutiny no longer made him nervous in the way it once had. He was confident that he was doing his best to apply the leadership lessons she had taught him, and he was more concerned with mission success than with impressing his instructor. The team's performance during the exercise was outstanding, with every member contributing meaningfully to their success. When Elena conducted the after-action review, her comments focused on the collaborative approach and effective communication that had characterized their effort. "Team leadership often requires subordinating your own ego to the needs of the mission," Elena told the assembled candidates. "The most effective leaders are often those who enable others to succeed, rather than those who try to do everything themselves." Marcus felt a surge of pride at Elena's words, not because he believed she was praising him specifically, but because he recognized that he had finally begun to understand what she had been trying to teach him. Leadership was not about domination or intimidation. It was about service to others and commitment to shared goals. As the training program entered its final months, Marcus found himself taking on increasing responsibility for the development and mentoring of newer candidates who joined the program. Elena had begun assigning him to assist with orientation and basic training, a responsibility that would have been unthinkable during his early weeks at Coronado. Working with new candidates forced Marcus to articulate the lessons he had learned about leadership, teamwork, and character. Teaching others helped reinforce his own understanding of these concepts while giving him an opportunity to practice the patient, supportive approach he had observed in Elena's instruction. During one orientation session, Marcus found himself working with a candidate whose background and attitude reminded him uncomfortably of his own early behavior. The young officer was physically impressive and clearly intelligent, but he had a tendency to dismiss the contributions of others and to rely on intimidation when challenged. Rather than confronting the candidate's behavior directly, Marcus chose to model the kind of leadership he had learned to value. He listened respectfully to the candidate's ideas, provided constructive feedback when appropriate, and created opportunities for him to succeed through collaboration rather than individual effort. Elena observed several of these mentoring sessions, and Marcus could see that she was evaluating his development as a leader and teacher. The responsibility was both intimidating and motivating, pushing him to continue refining his understanding of effective leadership principles. One evening, as Marcus was reviewing training materials in his quarters, he received an unexpected visit from Elena. She knocked on his doorframe and asked for permission to enter, a level of formality that surprised him given their history. "Candidate Chen," Elena said as she stepped into his room, "I wanted to speak with you about your progress in the program and your plans for the future." Marcus gestured for her to take the only chair in the room while he remained standing at attention. Elena's visit was clearly official in nature, but her tone suggested that it might be more positive than the meetings they had shared in her office. "I have been reviewing your performance evaluations over the past 4 months," Elena continued, "and I want you to know that your improvement has been remarkable. When you first arrived at Coronado, I had serious doubts about your suitability for any leadership role in the military. Today, I believe you have the potential to become an exceptional officer." Marcus felt a mix of pride and humility at Elena's words. Her opinion had become increasingly important to him over the course of the program, both because of her expertise and because of their personal history. However, Elena said, "I want to make sure you understand that changing your behavior during a training program is very different from maintaining that change throughout a military career. The real test of your character development will come when you are placed in positions of authority over others and faced with the daily temptations to revert to old patterns of behavior." Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what Elena meant. The controlled environment of the training program had made it relatively easy to focus on character development. Leading real soldiers in challenging situations would present much greater tests of his commitment to the principles he had learned. "I want to ask you a personal question," Elena said, her tone becoming less formal. "When you grabbed my arm in that college gymnasium, what were you thinking? What motivated that behavior?" Marcus had dreaded this conversation for months, but now that it was happening, he found himself relieved to have the opportunity to address their history directly and honestly. "I was angry and entitled," Marcus replied without hesitation. "I had just been broken up with, I was feeling sorry for myself, and I took out my frustrations on someone I perceived as an easy target. I used my size and strength to intimidate you because it made me feel powerful and in control." Elena listened to his explanation without interrupting, her expression remaining neutral as Marcus continued. "I want you to know that I understand now how wrong my behavior was," Marcus said. "I violated your personal space, I made you feel unsafe, and I demonstrated exactly the kind of character flaws that make someone unsuitable for military leadership. I am deeply sorry for my actions, and I am grateful that you gave me the opportunity to learn from my mistakes rather than simply ending my career." Elena studied him for several long moments before responding. "I appreciate your honesty," she said, "and I want you to know that your apology is accepted. But I also want you to understand something important about why I chose to give you a second chance." She leaned forward in her chair, her expression becoming more intense. "I have seen too many promising young officers destroyed by character flaws that could have been corrected with proper guidance and motivation. The military invests significant resources in training leaders, and it seems wasteful to discard someone who has the potential to serve effectively simply because they made poor choices early in their development." Elena paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. "I also believe that people who have genuinely confronted their own weaknesses and worked to overcome them often become stronger leaders than those who have never been tested. Your experience with failure and redemption could make you more empathetic and effective in your future assignments." Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude for Elena's perspective and her willingness to invest in his development despite their difficult history. Her decision to mentor him, rather than simply punish him, had changed the entire trajectory of his life. "I have a recommendation for your next assignment," Elena said, returning to a more official tone. "There is an opening for a junior officer with one of the SEAL teams based here at Coronado. It would not be a SEAL position, those require additional screening and training, but it would give you the opportunity to work closely with some of the most professional warriors in the world." Marcus felt his heart racing at the possibility Elena was describing. Working with the SEALs would be an incredible opportunity to continue learning about leadership and to contribute to important missions. "The position would require a recommendation from your current instructor," Elena continued. "Based on your performance over the past 4 months, I am prepared to provide that recommendation. However, I want to make sure you understand the significance of what I am offering you." Elena stood up from her chair and moved to the window, looking out at the Pacific Ocean that was visible in the distance. If you accept this assignment and perform well, you could have an exceptional military career ahead of you. The skills you have developed during this program, combined with your newfound understanding of leadership principles, could take you far in the Navy. She turned back to face Marcus with a serious expression. But if you revert to your old behaviors and demonstrate that your improvement was only superficial, you will not get another chance. The special operations community is small, and reputation matters enormously. A single incident of poor judgment or character failure could end your career permanently. Marcus understood exactly what Elena was telling him. This assignment represented both an incredible opportunity and a significant test of whether his transformation was genuine and lasting. "I won't let you down, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez," Marcus said with conviction, "and I won't let myself down either." Elena smiled for the first time since entering his room, and Marcus caught a glimpse of the person behind the professional instructor facade. "I believe you," she said, "and I'm looking forward to seeing what you accomplish with this opportunity." As Elena prepared to leave his quarters, Marcus felt compelled to express his gratitude one more time. "Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez," he said, "thank you for believing I could be better than I was. This program changed my life, and I know that change started with your decision to give me a second chance instead of the punishment I deserved." Elena paused in the doorway and turned back to face him. "Remember this feeling, Candidate Chen," she said. "Remember how it feels to be given an opportunity you don't deserve by someone who chooses to see your potential rather than your failures. Someday you will have the chance to make the same choice for someone else, and I hope you will remember the difference it made in your own life." With those words, Elena left Marcus alone with his thoughts and the enormous responsibility that came with his upcoming assignment. The journey from bully to leader was not yet complete, but he had traveled farther than he ever thought possible. The real work was just beginning. 2 years had passed since Marcus Chen completed his training at Coronado, and his assignment as a liaison officer with SEAL Team 7 had proven to be everything Elena Rodriguez had promised and more. The experience of working alongside some of the most elite warriors in the world had accelerated his development as a leader and had given him opportunities to apply the lessons he had learned during his transformative months under Elena's instruction. Marcus's role involved coordinating between the SEAL teams and conventional Navy units, ensuring that special operations missions were properly supported and integrated with broader strategic objectives. The position required exceptional communication skills, deep understanding of both special operations capabilities and conventional military resources, and the ability to build relationships across different military communities. The work had tested every aspect of Marcus's character development. He regularly found himself in situations where his old tendencies toward dominance and intimidation would have been counterproductive, forcing him to rely on the collaborative leadership style Elena had helped him develop. The results had been remarkable, both in terms of mission success and his growing reputation within the special operations community. On a particularly challenging deployment to Southeast Asia, Marcus had been assigned to coordinate a joint operation involving Navy SEALs, Marine Force reconnaissance units, and local military forces from 3 different countries. The complexity of the mission required delicate diplomacy and cultural sensitivity, skills that the old Marcus would never have possessed. During the planning phase, Marcus found himself working with Captain Maria Santos, a Marine officer whose aggressive leadership style reminded him uncomfortably of his own past behavior. Santos had a tendency to dismiss the contributions of the local military representatives, treating them as obstacles rather than partners in the mission. Rather than confronting Santos directly, Marcus chose to model the kind of inclusive leadership he had learned from Elena. He made special efforts to highlight the expertise and insights offered by the local commanders, created opportunities for meaningful collaboration, and gradually demonstrated that respectful partnership produced better results than cultural domination. The approach required patience and persistence, but by the end of the deployment, even Santos had begun to appreciate the value of truly collaborative planning. The mission itself was a complete success, with all objectives achieved and no casualties among friendly forces. More importantly, the relationships built during the operation created a foundation for future cooperation between American and local military units. Word of Marcus's performance during the Southeast Asian deployment reached Elena through the informal networks that connected special operations trainers with field commanders. When Marcus returned to Coronado for a brief period of stateside duty, Elena requested a meeting to discuss his experiences and continued development. They met at a small cafe near the base, a casual setting that reflected the evolution of their relationship, from instructor-student to professional colleagues with mutual respect. Elena had recently been promoted to commander and had been assigned additional responsibilities for developing training protocols for joint international operations. I've been hearing good things about your work with the Joint Task Force, Elena said as they sat down with their coffee. Captain Rodriguez specifically mentioned your ability to build consensus among very different military cultures. Marcus felt a familiar surge of pride at Elena's words, but it was a different kind of pride than he had experienced in his younger years. This satisfaction came from knowing he had contributed meaningfully to mission success and had helped others perform at their best, rather than from personal recognition or dominance over others. The deployment taught me a lot about the importance of cultural humility, Marcus replied. I learned that effective leadership often requires stepping back and allowing others to take the lead when they have superior knowledge or cultural expertise. Elena nodded with approval. That's a lesson many officers never learn, she said. The ability to subordinate your ego to mission requirements is one of the most valuable leadership skills in modern military operations. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, a young naval aviator who had recently been assigned to Elena's training program. Mitchell approached their table with obvious nervousness, clearly unsure whether she should interrupt what appeared to be a private conversation. Commander Rodriguez, Mitchell said hesitantly, I apologize for interrupting, but I wanted to thank you for the feedback on my leadership assessment. Your suggestions about active listening and inclusive decision-making have already made a significant difference in my interactions with my aircrew. Elena smiled warmly at the young officer. I'm glad the feedback was helpful, Lieutenant. Remember that leadership skills require constant practice and refinement. Continue working on those techniques and don't hesitate to ask questions when you need guidance. As Mitchell walked away, Marcus found himself reflecting on the parallel between her situation and his own experience 2 years earlier. The difference was that Mitchell was clearly eager to learn and improve, while Marcus had initially resisted Elena's guidance and had required a much more dramatic intervention to recognize his need for change.
She reminds me of myself when I first arrived at Coronado, Marcus said, except with a much better attitude and willingness to accept feedback.
Elena laughed, a sound that Marcus had rarely heard during his time as her student. Actually, she reminds me more of you now than you then, Elena replied.
Mitchell has natural leadership abilities and genuine concern for others. Your early challenges were more fundamental. You had to learn basic respect for other people before we could even begin working on leadership skills. The comment was delivered without malice, but it served as a useful reminder of how far Marcus had traveled in his personal development. The man sitting across from Elena bore little resemblance to the arrogant bully who had grabbed a young woman's arm in a college gymnasium. I've been thinking about our conversation the night before I left for Southeast Asia, Marcus said. You mentioned that the real test of character development comes when people are placed in positions of authority over others. I wanted to talk to you about an incident that happened during the deployment. Elena's expression became more serious, recognizing that Marcus was about to share something important about his continued growth as a leader. There was a young Marine corporal named Jackson who was part of our security team, Marcus began. He was physically strong and tactically competent, but he had a serious problem with respecting the local military personnel we were working with. His attitude was creating tension that could have compromised the mission. Marcus paused to consider his words carefully before continuing. Jackson reminded me of myself 2 years ago. Convinced that his American training made him superior to everyone else and unwilling to show basic respect to people he perceived as weaker or different. Elena listened intently as Marcus described his approach to addressing Jackson's behavior. Rather than using his rank to simply order the young Marine to change his attitude, Marcus had chosen to mentor him through a series of conversations and practical demonstrations of why respectful collaboration was more effective than cultural arrogance. I shared some of my own experiences with poor judgment and character failures, Marcus explained. I told Jackson about my time in your program and how learning to respect others had made me a more effective leader. It took several weeks, but eventually he began to understand that strength and respect were not mutually exclusive. Elena's expression showed clear approval as Marcus described the outcome of his mentoring efforts. Jackson had not only improved his own behavior, but had become an advocate for respectful collaboration within the Marine unit, helping to create a more positive working environment for the entire Joint Task Force. That's exactly the kind of leadership impact I hoped you would have, Elena said. Using your own experiences with failure and redemption to help others avoid similar mistakes is one of the most valuable contributions you can make as an officer. Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction at Elena's words, recognizing that he had finally begun to repay some of the investment she had made in his development. The ability to help Jackson avoid the character failures that had once threatened his own career felt like a meaningful contribution to both the mission and the young Marine's future. I have something I want to discuss with you, Elena said, shifting to a more formal tone. I've been asked to develop a new leadership training program for junior officers who have shown potential, but have also demonstrated character or behavioral issues that need to be addressed. Marcus immediately understood the significance of what Elena was proposing. She was describing a program designed to help officers like he had been. Individuals with natural abilities who needed guidance in developing the character necessary for effective leadership. The program would be based on the approach we used with you. Elena continued. Intensive mentoring combined with challenging practical exercises designed to break down ego and build up empathy and collaborative skills. I think you would be an ideal instructor for such a program. The offer represented an incredible opportunity for Marcus to contribute directly to the development of future military leaders while also allowing him to continue working with Elena in a professional capacity. But more than that, it was recognition that his own transformation had been complete enough to serve as a model for others facing similar challenges. I would be honored to be part of that program, Marcus replied without hesitation. The opportunity to help other officers avoid the mistakes I made and develop the character necessary for effective leadership would be incredibly meaningful work. Elena smiled with obvious pleasure at his response.
I was hoping you would say that. The program is scheduled to begin in 6 months, which will give us time to develop the curriculum and training protocols.
Your insights into the transformation process will be invaluable in creating effective interventions. As they discussed the details of the proposed program, Marcus found himself thinking about the circular nature of his journey. He had begun as Elena's problem student, someone whose character failures had nearly ended his military career. Now he was being invited to serve as an instructor, helping other struggling officers find their way too.